There's a part of ourselves I would call deep right. Heidegger, Kaczynski. The deep right contemplates death, infinity, and wants integration and harmony. Buddhism, poetry, philosophy, primitivism. Can't ignore this part of ourselves. We have to address it through religion. At the same time, there's a part of ourselves that is deep left. Technics, technology, Faustianism, change. Erotic, creative, inventive, explorative. Can't just hide in the woods and pretend it doesn't exist. We have to confront it and express it. The billionaire left is what most people call liberalism. The billionaire left seeks to monopolize power by destroying the average person and preventing competition. The billionaire left seeks a peaceful world because there will be no challenger. Ultimately, this is actually deep right because they don't want change. They want themselves on the thrones forever. But it's a very sadistic, uncaring form of the deep right. The billionaire left wants to see people enslaved to maximize their relative power. The deep left wants to see people empowered to express their creative potential, no matter how creative, conflicting of a market that creates. What does it mean to be left-wing? To be left-wing is to change. In a changing environment, it's necessary to change in order to survive. On the other hand, if your environment stays the same, it's probably best to just keep on doing what's not broken. The crocodile's pretty much been the same for millions of years. You've got archaeobacteria, pretty much been the same for even longer. What differentiates humans from other animals is we have these evolving mimetic linguistic technologies that allow us to change our environment. This allows us to be more left-wing with respect to other animals or other apes. Now, relatively speaking, those humans who stayed in Africa were doing the right-wing thing, while those who left were being left-wing. The Chinese system of characters, which involves this intensive memorization, tens of thousands of individual words, is relatively right-wing, whereas the Western style of producing phonetic alphabets, where you can recombine, add to, subtract, and change words all around, is relatively left-wing. The ancient pagan faiths were based in specific bloodlines or a specific plot of soil, whereas the universalist monotheistic religions were relatively left-wing. In the 14th century, those areas of Europe which were hit by the Black Plague experienced a period of change that resulted in the Renaissance, while those in the East, which did not, their social structures remained in place and they remained relatively right-wing. The areas of Northern Europe that broke away from the Catholic Church were relatively left-wing. God is the truth. The truth is that which is, as opposed to that which is not. God is the will behind this duality. Religion is the process by which we seek truth. Seeking truth means to exist and to survive. All knowledge is a representation of truth. All genetics is therefore a representation of knowledge. We hate the truth because it causes us pain. We reject truth out of selfishness. The goal of religion and science is to destroy selfishness so that we may seek truth. Through ritual, meditation, and prayer, we can destroy our selfishness. Anything which moves us outside of ourselves brings us farther away from this selfishness. These include family, friends, religion, ethnicity, intimacy. The elite are selfish, and they want to hoard the truth for themselves. They wish to deprive us of our intimacy with other people and with God. The Father represents the truth. The Son represents the destruction of selfishness, and the Holy Spirit represents the intimacy which unifies us. Loneliness is a void filled by ideology. Lack of intimacy, lack of trust. Ideology attempts to fill this void, but radical ideologues on the left and right always descend into infighting because they don't have trust. If someone shares your political beliefs, it doesn't mean you can trust them, and it doesn't mean that they love you.
If people really want to fill that void in a non-superficial way, it's going to have to be done with morality, not ideology. Once you have a solid base of morality, you can add ideology on top of that. You will no longer be dependent upon radical pornographic ideology for a dopamine hit to fill the void, because the void will be filled. There will be a well to drink from, which is good, nourishing, not one which is like the salt water that makes you more thirsty. When you have a basic feeling of trust and love and intimacy in your life, you can look at ideology with sober eyes, because you'll no longer be dependent upon it as a substitute, like porn is a substitute for real intimacy.
We define ourselves. We invest in a narrative. This is a good narrative. It's a good story. It's a good mythos. But when we engage in victimology, when we define ourselves as victims, then we create an existential crisis where to resolve our victimary status would mean our literal death. In order to keep ourselves alive, we have to ritualistically relive the pain or humiliation or victimization that we believe makes us who we are. Sometimes a clean slate is necessary. The secular atheist takes solace in the idea that death is this clean slate, but that's not true. Somebody has to pick up where we left off. It's very powerful to empty oneself of one's own negative persona. When Christ says, "Not my will, but your will, O Lord," he is emptying himself of his own earthly human persona, and he's opening himself up to something completely different. What it allows us to become is slaves to a new master. I say a new master because if we don't have an external master, we have an internal master. The Nietzschean believes that to be a master of oneself, it's the best. But if you're a poor master, then not only do you abuse others, but you also abuse yourself. We see how the rich are irresponsible with their drug use, how they end up dead or in the gutter, bankrupt. Children, left to their own devices, provide themselves with a terrible education, a terrible diet. We are not necessarily our own best master. That doesn't necessarily mean that anyone who is powerful is a good master. A good master is someone who cares. There are plenty of people in this world who want to control you, who want to be your master because they reliving their pain in an external, abusive, and sadistic sense.
Imagine you're in a chamber. It's a dark chamber. You can't see what's going on, but you can feel the water rising. The water's rising, and up above you are 3 different paths. You can't see how far up they go. You don't know how far up the water will rise, but you know you need to move up. And so you start climbing upwards. And the water is rising beneath your feet. And you reach the end of one of these paths. You hit a dead end, and the water is rising, and it's up to your neck. You have 2 choices. You can tread water. You can press your face up against the roof of this path, these 3 tunnels. You can, just stick to your guns on this one, or you can go into those waters that threaten to drown you. You can dive down into the waters. You can submerge yourself, hold your breath. It's going to be painful, it's going to be uncomfortable, and then you can re-emerge yourself into one of these other paths. All right, so you have these 3 paths, and you're down at the bottom where my thumb and pinky are, and you're moving up into this path. Well, this path isn't tall enough. You're going to drown, so you have to go back down, submerge yourself in the water, and then come up through a longer path. When you hit a dead end, you kind of have to go back to base principles, and you have to do something that to many people seems crazy. If you've been doing something one way your whole life, than to resubmerge yourself into pre-rationality, questioning your axioms, questioning everything you've ever been told. That seems crazy. Like fundamentally, we're all trying to escape the drowning. We're trying to escape the water. We're trying to get to higher ground, to shelter, to dry land. But ultimately, to actually survive this process, we don't want to get stuck in the short tunnel. We have to go back into the water and resubmerge.
So when we discuss universal education, we almost always talk about the intellectual component. How are we going to prepare kids for the job market to get the job that they want to make money? We're talking about how can we teach them how to learn, these intellectual, mentalistic focuses. The most important thing in education, universal education, something that we all need to give people, it's not how to learn, it's not intellectualism, it's not academia, it's not how to make money. None of that matters if you don't have a solid, firm, emotional, and psychological anchor in your life. If you don't have that foundation to push off of, it's very much like having a brand new sailboat with all kinds of radar devices, and you've got the state of the art sort of, let's say you have some life jackets on there made out of like some weird alien material. It's a very expensive ship. It's a big ship. It's got all the doohickeys. It's got toilets made of gold or whatever. But if it doesn't have sails, and if it doesn't have a motor, if it doesn't have the drive, it doesn't have the energy to push off, to push against the wind or to push against the water, then it doesn't matter how big and expensive and illustrious and elaborate you make that boat, it's not going anywhere. And so this is why we see very intelligent people who are stuck in these cycles of politics online, or they're stuck in video games, they're stuck in pornography, they're stuck in anxiety, they're stuck, and they're going around in circles, and they're using their intellect to build bigger prisons for themselves, mental prisons, because they don't have that fundamental emotional, psychological, stabilizing structure, whether you imagine it as a sail or whether you imagine it as the motor pushing against the water. They've just got a bunch of life jackets and a radar, and they're not going anywhere. So that's really what we need to change our focus for education.
So I watched the Jay Dyer interview with Sam Hyde. He was describing his parents, and I thought it was very interesting because I identified with a lot of what he was saying, especially about the lack of substance of the father, right? So when you look at the boomers, they clearly rebelled against their parents, but that was fine, right? In terms of life, they sort of got a C minus. It wasn't that great, but they passed the test. That is, their fathers were assertively telling them, you have to be this, this, and this, and they said, no, no, no. We're going to be rebels. We're going to be Elvis. We're going to be the Beatles. And so they did worse than their parents, but they still passed the test. What happened was the boomers, as a result of their rebellion, said, we're not even going to give a test to our kids. We're not even going to tell our kids what to do. If we are, we're going to do it in a very relaxed way because we don't want to be like our parents. We're the rebels. We're not going to be the rebellious parents of the rebellious kids. That doesn't work. So we're going to let them do what they want to do. And so Gen X, they started getting D's, and millennials started getting F's. And by the time you get to Gen Z, you're not even talking about showing up for the test, because why do I need a test for? I've got porn and video games. So this progression where if you have parents who tell you you have to do this, this, and this, and you rebel, when you rebel, you're saying, I'm going to do this instead. You're not saying I'm going to do nothing. You're going to say, I hate your proposal. I have my own proposal. Whereas when you simply remove the parents, specifically the father telling the kid what to do, you get no rebellion. We're the least rebellious generation ever because we're not rebelling against anything, because we've been given a big nothing sandwich of nihilism and told that's how you're supposed to be, and we've conformed to that, as opposed to the boomers who were genuinely rebelling against their parents and actually put something forth that was ultimately destructive, but at least it was interesting. I just learned that the Aztec Empire was created after the establishment of Oxford University. Now, I think of the Aztec Empire as like this ancient primordial empire of Mesoamerica. It's this ancient, powerful, mystical thing of the far past, that if we could get back to it, it's like I'm thinking of the first cities of the world, right? I'm thinking of the Indus River Valley. I'm thinking about Mesopotamia. I'm thinking about the Aztec Empire. And I have this feeling because they're all building like these stone pyramids. I have this feeling like they were all established at the same time, which would make sense because they all have similar technology. They sort of look the same. But then you realize the Aztec Empire wasn't founded until after the 11th century, and Oxford University was started as this cathedral school, and it's continued. And so the Oxford University Empire is older than the Aztec Empire. It's just blowing my mind right now.